Chapter 17. Roses by Other Names. Both of my grandmothers were named Rose. I called my father's mother Bobby, and my mother's mother Granny, and they were quite different. My granny was much more Americanized and spoke excellent English. She was slight and pale, and with white hair pulled back into a bun, and there was a gentleness about her. When I was a kid, before my brother was born, she bought me 2 pairs of corduroy knickers, gray and brown for school. They rubbed together and squeaked when I walked down the aisle in the classroom, and everyone looked at me, but I wore them anyway. After she died, when I was older, I heard rumors that she had committed suicide. Presumably, the cause was her unhappy marriage to my mother's father, Hyman. I didn't know anything about that. I was only 7 or 8 at the time I'm remembering, although I don't recall them relating to each other when we were together, but I remember my grandfather, Pa, vividly, and that I loved him. Pa had a slightly sallow complexion, and vaguely Asian features, which I'm reminded of whenever I look into my lovely daughter Susan's eyes. I know from pictures that his hair was dark with some silver and neatly combed, and he wore what appear to have been rimless glasses. He smoked cigars in an amber holder and took me to the zoo, his favorite delicatessen, and my first Chinese restaurant, which must have been near his tailoring business. It was more than a shop and less than a factory. I remember a big, cluttered room with sewing machines and bolts of colorful fabrics. When he took me places, he always introduced me with great pride. After Granny died, Pa moved in with us, my folks and my baby brother Roy and me. It was 1941. Roy was born 3 days after Pearl Harbor. We lived upstairs in a comfortable duplex apartment, 2 bedrooms, a dining room, and a stove in the kitchen where my mother thawed out my clean clothes, which froze in the winter on the pulley line that ran between the back porch and the garage. There was a small backyard with a short stone wall that dropped off into a patch of woods where I played with the neighborhood kids. And beyond, through the woods, was an abandoned, falling down, scary barn, which we ventured into whenever we could work up the courage. We built hideouts in the woods and snowmen in the backyard, and once we made an igloo. On the same spot in the summer, I used an empty refrigerator carton turned on its side as a fort. It lasted until a heavy rainstorm ruined it. We had a coal bin in the basement, and the truck would come and deliver coal through a low window, down the chute into the bin. It was my job to shovel coal into the furnace and take out the ashes. In the humid summers, we'd fill the empty ash barrels with water and sit in them up to our armpits. Our downstairs neighbors were the Norreens, a very nice, genteel family with 2 boys. Harold was older, and Ronald about my age. He and I used to play catch in the driveways that adjoined each other and separated our house from the one next door. We were pretty careful because next door there was a big chow dog that hid at the edge of the woods next to the garages below the wall, and we never knew whether he was there or not. All we could see was the length of the chain that restrained him. One day, the ball got away from us and rolled over the top edge of the wall and out of sight. We hesitated, and then Ronald called for his big brother Harold and asked him to get the ball for us. We thought he was very brave as he walked down the driveway towards the garage, keeping his eyes on the chain for any sign of movement. As he reached over the wall, the hidden, treacherous dog lunged, biting into Harold's bare calf and hanging on. We stared, frozen in horror, while Harold struggled to dispense himself. Finally, the dog let go for a moment, but he was poised to attack again. Harold managed to back off beyond the reach of the chain, dragging his leg. The bite left a gaping purple wound, and we could see the teeth marks inside it. 25 years later, I revisited our old home in that pleasant street, Richardson Avenue, in the Boston suburb of Arlington Heights, with Deborah and our 3 young daughters. It seemed unchanged. The street, the houses, the front porch I used to jump from, the side yard snowbank. But I could see down the driveway that the woods were gone. There were houses there now. On the way, we'd stopped at the local drugstore to see if Asher Spector still owned it. Long ago, he and his wife Ethel had been friendly with my folks, and while my mother was in the hospital when my brother Roy was born, I'd go to the drugstore or to their house after school to wait for my father to pick me up. Ethel would fix me snacks, and at the store Asher would get behind the soda fountain and dish up mounds of vanilla ice cream in a cone with Jimmy's. Asher had sold the drugstore, but now he was a customer, and the friendly young druggist looked up his address in the Rolodex. He still lived nearby. When Asher came to the door, I started to introduce myself, but somehow, after all these years, he knew me. And when Ethel came from the kitchen, wiping her hands on a towel, she took one look, smiled, and said, "Hello, Joel. How are you?" Later, we drove to Richardson Ave, and I rang the doorbell at number 16. A pleasant-looking woman answered at the front of the inside stairs. I gave my name and asked if I could see the apartment I knew when I was growing up. Mrs. Dolan was quite willing. As we chatted, Deborah mentioned that I was the producer of The Virginian. Mrs. Dolan grew animated. Her son loved my TV show, but hated their apartment. Mrs. Dolan was recently widowed, and they'd moved from a big, beautiful house. The boy was embarrassed to invite his friends over. We tramped through the rooms, Deborah, our 3 girls, and I. They were familiar, except for the kitchen, which had obviously been remodeled. I was very touched, filled with nostalgia, but the girls were hot, bored, and impatient. As we started to leave, Mrs. Dolan mentioned out of the blue the old French doors they'd found in the basement when they moved in. She had no idea where they'd come from, how they got there, or why. I turned back on the stairs. I knew. I knew how and why. 25 years earlier, when Pa moved in with us after my grandmother died, my folks turned our dining room into a master bedroom so my grandfather could have a room of his own. It was an awkward arrangement, since, quite naturally, you'd had to go through the dining room to get to the kitchen. But everyone managed, especially when my folks had French doors custom-made and installed between their new bedroom and the living room. I remembered my mother sewing curtains for privacy. Mrs. Dolan was glad to have the mystery solved at last, and hugged me when we left. On the way back to L.A. on the plane, I told my kids about how I used to crawl into bed with Pa and how he made up stories for me. One was about a little bear who had red pants. I loved that story and asked for it over and over again. It didn't occur to me until much later that the red pants might have had something to do with my pa's being a tailor. Before long, I received a letter from Mrs. Dolan. Her son had stopped asking when they could move and had been bragging to his friends about the producer who used to live there. Some of them didn't believe him, so I sent him an autographed picture of the Virginian stars. And I asked him to please tell his mother to never, under any circumstances, throw away or give away or sell the French doors.